And to tell you the truth, this is not what the promised land is. Okay? The promised land is this. The community is the one that creates this project. We are here to help, right? The community should give us the guidelines. And as soon as I have that guideline, my own thought is to gather with my friends and the community, indeed, to say, okay, how can we articulate this? In kind of, how can we mobilize this particular knowledge?
Promise of delivering knowledge, promise of producing material that could be used everywhere, whether be it in classrooms, for students, for graduate students, for pupils as well, in museums, in the community. It's all about using a promise of finding things that could be used to empower people.
Yes, you're going to get the textbook or you're going to get the articles, but those are the academic dry things that David was talking about. No, you're a teacher with this 14-year-old kid that you're wanting to reach, and he doesn't care. You know, he's thinking about Tupac. He's not thinking about Josiah. And then in which case, what can you do? And so it's like, we're going to learn this. We're going to learn this now. Here's a little bit. Get on your feet and live it in your body in a particular way. And then if you can do that, then our history lesson is done. Because all you can do is plant the seed of whether you'll be interested or not.
Now, we live in a global society, and accepting of one's culture, no matter what it is, makes everybody more comfortable, I believe. You know, last night we had Dave Van Kesteren, and he spoke about being Dutch, and his wife has a very unusual Dutch name. You know, and when she told me her name, I said, I thought it was an invented name. And she said, no, I can tell you the history of my name. I thought that was fascinating. So on my part, and I hope on her part, that was an acceptance of her culture. You know, and so the same thing would go for me if you're asking, like you're asking me questions, and you're non-Afro-Canadian. It makes me happy that you want to know about my particular culture.
As I say, we, as a community, we're working to abolish this discrimination between blacks and whites years before anybody else was. And by time the abolition came up in the United States, where the freedom of slaves, it was already done in Chatham. We were already working together as one entity, as one society, as one unit. And I think that's very important where it comes to the history of national history of Canada and the United States. By the time they had the idea set, we already had it working.
And then multiculturalism. Do you think it touches, picks up some of those notions as well?
Oh yeah, for sure, because it's all intertwined. This is Canada. This is the melting pot. This is where we all came from. Our own respective countries, our own respective areas came here to start a better life.
So pre-multiculturalism, in terms of theorizing, the notion of trajectories and how we can build on that. And we saw today with what Nina presented, she's added something to what I brought in as a notion of trajectories. She's added now the idea of intellectual trajectories, not just human migration.
But as Handel pointed out so beautifully last night, the most interesting part of all of this is not so much looking at the patterns that you can create and see, but it's in looking at the places where the patterns maybe surprise us or get a little more complicated. And so in pursuing Jenny Johnson further, thinking about her life and what it means, I'm interested in the idea of a trajectory, but in maybe expanding the definition of that from the movement of people, as in migrations in and out, to something, I don't know what sort of term we might use, but perhaps as intellectual migrations, as thinking of this in terms of the movement of ideas. So I would be asking not just what happened and how the patterns fit together, but why does it matter? Why did it matter then? How does it matter now?
I'm really struck by how we take up multiculturalism as a very presentist and futuristic kind of project, when in fact multiculturality is something that has always existed, and we don't usually talk about previous settlements, previous communities, very much in their multicultural terms. So part of what I also bring to this is a kind of way of looking at a pre-multiculturalism.
I found it an interesting perspective to take on the history, and to see it as a precursor to what we today see as multiculturalism. Like Handel talking about multiculturality versus multiculturalism, and the existence. The fact is that we've always had diversity. We've always had difference, but now it's in vogue. And it's something that, you know, we talk about so much and we belabor ridiculously. And the question is it making us more multicultural because we talk about it more? Or is it that we need to recognize that it's something that's always been there and we don't have to legislate it to make it so? You know, so it's an interesting spin for me, and I'm curious to see what we do with it, because we can talk all we want, you know, but what does it mean at the end of the day? Like, does it really speak to multiculturalism as it exists for us today? I don't know.
And I'm using that as a kind of way of understanding this, to say there's multiculturality, the very fact of difference, right? And there's multiculturalism, the policies, the theories, the ways of talking about how we get along with one another. So those two things are not necessarily the same. In fact, you can have multiculturality and you can have something quite different as what you do as a consequence of it, right? Giving these historical sketches, right? What does that mean for what we're calling multiculturalism? What does that mean for the future of how we live together in communities? What does that mean for how we talk about multiraciality? So I think this kind of history will show that there were intermarriages, interrelationships between Aboriginal people and blacks and whites, etc., etc., so that we now need to rethink how we're thinking about interracial relationships, biracial and multiracial children, and all of those kinds of things. I think this history is something that rubs up against the contemporary ways in which we talk about identities.